a great day, I'm feeling good. Oh, the possibilities of what I could.
What happens when a blind man, a woman of color, and a child of immigrants get together to discuss how diversity, inclusion, and equity affect your business?
I'm moving fast. Oh, I'm optimistic.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Choose Inclusion podcast. I'm UB and I am the Latino white guy of the group.
I'm Nina. I am the woman of color in the group.
And I'm Mike. I'm the blind guy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Choose Inclusion podcast. This is UB, and as always, I'm here with Mike and Nina. Hello, team.
Hey everyone.
Hello, hello.
Good to see you guys. Good to be back. We're very excited today. We have a guest. Her name is Shailvi Wakhlu. She is head of analytics at Komodo Health. And this is going to be a really great conversation because I think this is a conversation that will apply to a lot of people in this who are working in the DEI&B space, whether it's as a consultant or whether it's they care about it so much within their organization. So first of all, welcome, Shailvi. How are you?
Hi, thanks so much. I'm doing great and appreciate all of you to having me on this episode. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, we're very excited, and thank you for reaching out. Because you had reached out to us and to connect, to have this conversation. And so let's start with your journey. What does your journey look like into being an enthusiast and a practitioner of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work within your organization? How did you get there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I originally grew up in India and I wanted to be a coder for as long as I can remember. And it's been a very interesting path for me growing in my career. First as just the number of women that existed as coders. There was obviously that visibility factor that I didn't necessarily see a lot of people who looked like me, who had roles that I eventually wanted to get to. And it's been quite a path of just constantly, very intentionally trying to find mentors for myself who'd help me get to where I wanted to go and who'd guide me sort of course correct as I tried to take the next steps. And for me, when I reflect back to where I feel I have come, I think I try to live my life with gratitude, and I'm extremely grateful for all the support that I've had in my own journey. And that has, in a huge part propelled me to pass on that goodwill, the same goodwill that I got from others. And, my intention is to be there for other folks who need an advocate for their interest. I hope that I'm a logical person and I can articulate the needs of other folks as well. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do with the whole DEI initiatives as well.
I think where we wanted to dig in to that, because it's so important, right? Like it's always amazing to hear how people get into this, because I think it takes a lot because people know it's hard work. And so your original focus was on gender roles, right? Particularly in like engineering as engineering leads for people of color.
Yeah, that's sorry.
No. Yeah, I know it started there, but can you talk about how it evolved, right? To go beyond just focusing on gender. What was that like?
Yeah. So actually it was interesting. I started reflecting on this very recently, where I realized that, my identity as a woman was more upfront and center. Just because that was usually the most obvious distinction that I had as an engineering leader in the room. Even back in college, when I graduated, I was the only computer engineer, a woman who graduated in my graduating class. So it was something that sort of stuck out early. And I feel over the last couple of years, I think it has become a lot more comfortable in the work setting to talk about your experience as a woman in that field, especially in tech. And as I've sort of grown in my career, I've been the only female leader in a lot of cases. And so I feel that I also tended to focus a lot on the gender side of things. But then I realized that I'm also brown, I'm also an immigrant, I'm also I'm not American, and all of these things are not identities that really I also focused on too much. Because one, like, it didn't seem normal to be able to talk about these things at work. It didn't necessarily seem that this is an experience other people will view me as like that. That's not the primary identity other folks are assigning to me. So I've felt the need lately to sort of start rethinking the intersectionality of different identities that people have, and how they manifest in the problems that they face at work, and the sort of accomplishments that they can have at work based on all of these different identities.
Shailvi, thank you so much. This is Mike. Really appreciate you joining us today. I love learning new from leaders. Give me, if you don't mind, sharing with our audience. What are some tactical roadmap strategy? What are some of the things that you've done as a leader to help, because you've obviously got a personal stake in diversity, equity, and inclusion within your own organization. Give us some tips. What have you done to make an impact?
Yeah, I'd love to share that. And I think for me, almost everything, when I'm trying to do something, the first step is almost always awareness. Also, as a data person, that's just something that comes naturally to me, that let's at least figure out what's going on. Like, is there even a problem? Can we try to quantify it in some way? And I think that's the part where I've focused a lot of efforts. If we think about the pipeline of just my company and its employees, there's a whole funnel of things, like who's actually applying to work here, and once they apply, who do we call in for an interview, who do we actually convert into into an offer and actually say, like, yes, we want you to come work here. And then once they're here, who do we retain, who do we promote, who do we grow out into leadership positions, who are we accepting referrals from for other folks that will come and work here. And so one of the things that I did was almost like try to map out that entire sort of set of metrics that our company should be looking at. And this is something that I was able to share with our head of people, who was super sort of responsive to that. And I said, like, here's my opinion on what I think we should be measuring, because I think that's the first step. Like, I think just being able to see some of that data is going to give us a little bit of insight on what's going on, and identify like places where there's problems. And within that, like within all of this data, like we have to start breaking down the dimensions. So as I said, like, my default has always been to look at gender. So even when I'm working for a new company, like I'm seeing how many women leaders are there, how many women are in the room when I'm being interviewed, and all of those things. But I think it's time for us to really prioritize diversity across the board. And I think there should be this very conscious effort that's made to not just think about gender, but also think about race, think about sexual orientation, think about disabilities, think about education background, and all of those dimensions. The more you sort of start at least raising your awareness about whether there's a problem that exists, only then can you actually start trying to do something about it. So that's kind of what I've started with.
I love it, Nina. I know you're chomping to get in here, but I just got to say that is fantastic. I love how you broke this down very, very intentionally. Start looking at all the different data components within, from it's much more than pipeline. It's much more than interviewing. So there's so much to that, and I so appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of the things that I want to go back to was that kind of intersectionality of identities, right? I'm with you. I'm a woman, but I'm also a child of Indian immigrants, and so I wear multiple identities at any given time. And And so I was wondering, like, what was that like for you to start expanding the the experience of addressing kind of the gender? Because I had the exact same journey. Like, it always starts off with gender, and then you start to layer in all the other complexities of what does intersectionality mean? What does it mean to start advocating for groups that fall outside of your own personal identity? What was that journey like for you, and how did you bring that into your work discussions?
Yeah, I think I mean, again, I don't think I've found all the answers yet, but I am trying to get there. I think the things that I spent a lot of time thinking about is that what there are some identities that honestly, even from a privacy perspective, maybe you don't actually want to have people disclose that. Like people might not be comfortable disclosing their religious identities, and I don't think we should push for things like that. Like, it's not um we want to do the best based on the things that we already know are common ways that harm is caused. But if people don't want to disclose some aspect of it just so that we make sure our diversity initiatives are on track, like I think that's fine. We should not push for that. So I think I tried to, as I sort of like went through that mentally as well, the thing that I kind of started to focus on was the educational background piece. Because as a person who's hired in the tech industry for a really long time, that is consistently something that comes up as as something that people, I feel, can be a little elitist about. That what kind of a degree do you have, or which school did you go to, and is it a known brand, is it not a known brand? And in some ways, that that educational background can actually, it can be an indicator of other demographics. People of color are less likely to be able to go to certain schools or something like that. So I do feel that it's tied directly to what we're trying to do, that when we're interviewing people, we want it to be skill based. We don't want it to be based on sort of indicators that are not truly demonstrative of how people would perform on the job. So that's, I feel like, at least one thing that I've sort of focused on, that like, how do we sort of separate out things that we think are indicators, but they're really just furthering the bias, and rather shift to a better and a more coherent evaluation of people's skills in instead. And I think that is a push towards more fairness in a process, which I think is better for most people.
I think one of the interesting things that a lot of our listeners have challenge with, because we all have this kind of passion for making institutional change within our companies, but not all of us have the ability to just be on the C-suite to make those decisions. And sometimes we're working in organizations that are just so large, but we know that we can make an impact, or we want to make at least some type of impact towards this vision of creating a more equitable workforce. As a manager, as a person who wants to at least bring some kind of impact on their team, like, how do you manage to do that when maybe your company hasn't overtly stated a plan of action around that?
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think that's a good thing to have to think about. Because obviously the company is going to be slower to act on certain things than you as an individual might be able to at least institute change within your own sort of part of the piece that you own. So I think one thing is, I mean, I very consciously try to only work for companies where I know that, at least as a philosophy or as values, like I'm aligned with the leadership team, and that is something that I care very deeply about. Like, I don't think I could work at a company where it's okay if they're slower to act on something, but if I feel that they're just going to have a very different reaction to things that I passionately care about, like, that's probably not the right place for me. Because I, as someone who represents management, like, I want to represent my values too, and I can't defend values that I don't personally share. So I think, at least at my company, I have been very appreciative that I have the freedom to at least do some things within my team, and if I can do that, if I can create that vision, it just becomes that much easier to sort of showcase that, hey, here's how my team sort of thought of this. And here's what we prioritized in our own team. So to continue on that interviewing example, I sought a lot of feedback from my reports, and some of them are wonderfully open people who share a lot of that valuable feedback with me. And I asked them, like, what do you think are problems in our process? And some of them gave really great suggestions. They one person pointed out that they said, even amongst our the interview screens that we do, there is this one like there's a bunch of technical screens that we do, and then there's this sort of behavioral one, and it's only the women who run that behavioral sort of session. And it sets up a very different example of what we're trying to showcase. And like that's just another way that you perpetuate bias. So that was an easy one that we could fix even just within our own team, that we really pushed for everybody to get trained on that session, so that it wasn't just the women who were running the behavioral part. And other men on the team signed up too. And it was sort of an easy way to sort of at least start tackling one piece. But since then we've gone on to really like look at our interview process in detail, see like which questions nudge people a certain way that might bias against a certain demographic, or just even discourage people from applying if they look at our job description and they feel that doesn't really sound like them.
I'm sorry, Ubaldo, I know it's your turn, man, but I am so impressed with Shailvi, you just saying, hey, you know what, we we're this is a journey, and here's something that we learned along our journey, and we did a course correction. I am just so that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I like Mike is he's our biggest cheerleader, as you can tell. he and we all, everything that you're saying is it's great, because it really, these are great examples, that other people who are trying to do the same thing can really take back and hopefully implement at that smaller scale to show, right? Like, because a part of it is, well, I feel like people feel like in the who are doing this work really feel like they have to prove it first, prove it out on a smaller scale, in order to get leadership to buy in. And I mean, it's interesting, and I don't know if you've seen this at Komodo Health yet or not, but because of COVID and because of these conversations around racial inequalities and systemic issues, did you see, or have you seen a shift? Like, we've seen a shift in how leaders are viewing diversity and inclusion training, for example, right? All of a sudden it's a priority. Have you seen that shift because of these two major events just in the span of a few months?
Yeah, I absolutely have. And I think, again, I'm super grateful. Like, Komodo, I think, has a culture that I feel is a very thoughtful culture. And just a side story, but one of the reasons I joined Komodo was because it's run by two minority co-founders who've, I think, been very successful in raising funds in this industry, and that personally to me was inspiring. And I've seen sort of the side effect of that when a lot of these racism conversations started, I think our co-founders were very sort of upfront, and they came out and they said, hey, this is something that we do care about. But we are, at the end of the day, a startup, and I think the thing that we suffer from is just time. So they're like, you're all empowered to sort of plan and organize and figure out how we should do this. Like, if the answer is that we should hire people who can help walk us through certain things, or if there's things that we can do ourselves, if we can find problems that we can chip away at. So like, I think that really motivated the employee base quite a lot, because they felt that there is this larger sort of support from senior leadership about prioritizing some of these initiatives. but people also had the authority, had the empowerment to sort of go out and take it in the direction that they want. And when they needed help, the company would sort of support them in those little missing pieces. And we as a company, like, I think we did a great job, like, just kind of even talking about a lot of these things, because as I mentioned earlier, like, gender conversations, I think, still have become more acceptable at work, but I think race is still something we're discussing for the first time, at least since I've been working. Like, I don't think I've had conversations about race at work. So it's very, very fascinating to see that transition and to really feel that energy of hoping that there's something great that comes out of it.
One of the questions, or that we haven't really talked about much in the podcast, I think generally when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and in the industry, we're always thinking about, the people that are working for the company. But we don't necessarily think about what are the products or services we're building and how that impacts marginalized and underrepresented communities. And the fact that sometimes the things we build can actually inadvertently cause harm to these marginalized groups. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm super happy to dig into that topic, because it's something that I've really been thinking about a lot lately. I've built, analyzed, and used enough products to just know that there's no such thing as a harmless product. Like, that just that doesn't exist. And I like it. Like, I think we're all starting to become a little more aware of products that have unintended consequences, but I'd almost argue that there are products that have known harmful consequences. And the issue is that those known consequences, like, we just didn't anticipate how they would how those consequences would scale. So either when we went from whatever 20,000 users to 2 billion users, like, how does that change the volume of harm that's being caused? Or just as we grow as a company, like, are we amplifying problems in just now? Earlier it was one way, and now it's like these 15 different ways that are intersecting in this very odd manner. So I think for me, the problem that I sort of feel is worth in tech, especially, something that we should talk about, is that most of these consequences, these harmful consequences, are almost systemically being ingrained into our products, because and it's usually like it might be subconscious in a lot of cases, but it's because we very much think about that. Oh, how do people if I test it and I don't really see a problem with it, and my friends won't have a problem with it, I don't need to worry about it too much. But I think that's a very, very privileged mindset, because it is usually very privileged folks who are building out these products. And in some ways, they're almost they're ignoring the needs of people who are marginalized, but they're also amplifying the problems that they face. So I think it's worth us in tech having a very honest discussion about these things, and trying to figure out, like, what can we actually do to minimize such cases. And yeah, that's something I think is worth talking about.
I agree. And I mean, that's one thing we've learned to tie it back to the conversation about racism, and how that conversation has become amplified. The systemic systems that have been in place to specifically target people of color and not give them the same opportunities through products and services such as insurance or mortgages, or where they can live, right? Like consider a product, a house. And so it is so overdue to have this conversation, because that one of the most impactful things that I became aware of a couple years ago when speaking to an engineering manager. He made the point that how are we expected to build a product for a diverse group of customers when my whole team are white males? Like, that's one small perspective, and that's how we're building our whole product based on that one perspective.
Yep.
How is that going to serve a diverse group of customers? So I think that this is, if anything, this is one of the most critical pieces of the conversation of why diversity is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you that even to that person who highlighted like, how is my very white male team supposed to build for something? Yeah, go hire some people who are not white. Like, that's I think one good place to start with. But I'd also like push that, we can't actually, I think the diverse hiring piece is very important, but I don't think that that should be sort of the only excuse. Like, hey, I didn't think of this because I didn't have anybody who would have experienced this. I mean, I think companies, if you think about it, like tech companies actually already have these security teams or these ethical hackers or sort of an integrity team that is trying to break their own code. They have QA folks, like they already have these systems in place where people are trying to find vulnerabilities within their product. Except I think for those teams, it's typically a focus of, see if someone can hack into my website or see if someone can steal people's data. But I would say that why don't you extend those same sort of systems that you already have in place, but really extend them to figuring out, like, if I was a bad actor, how would I misuse this product? So almost, go back to engineering basics and think very deeply, like, how do I break my own code? Like, I'm not a bad actor, but like, what if I was? How can I misuse this? And that is going to help you find some vulnerabilities that, if you at least find out about it, like, you can try to prioritize fixing it. But just sort of relying on an employee to tell you that this might be an issue is also sort of just a cop out, right? That it doesn't fully address your responsibility as a company to intentionally try to make sure that your product is not going to cause harm.
What a fascinating conversation. I honestly, Shailvi, I hadn't thought of it from that standpoint, but you're saying extend this, like what I'm hearing is you're saying extend the again the security threat kind of test to almost a demographic type threats as well. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, switch it out to demographics, switch it out to even just, what is the possible way, like, if you think about the intended use of your product, like what would be an unintended use of your product? So I think the example that came to my mind is about LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, we are encouraged to sort of keep our profile up to date, put our profile picture, share our sort of achievements. And the general theory is that recruiters can access a little extra information. Like, they can even get access to your resume, which very often has your home address and your phone number. And that's a paid part. Like, recruiters have to pay for that privilege. But so you'd think that because they're paying for something like that, like, I'll pay for something that I actually need. But what if there's a stalker there? Like, what if there's a stalker who's willing to pay that money in order to go and harm people? Like, they can still pay that money, and you're then putting some people in a lot of harm's way, because people can get access to information that they really did not, like, they wanted to share it with a person who might give them a job, not with a person who will show up at their house and potentially be a threat to them. And that's just something, like, that's not something that people hope is how their product will be used. But if your product is actually being used like that, even if there's one case, like, how do you set up a situation so that people can, one, prevent this from happening in the first place, but also have a backup plan to re-anchor your product if situations like these show up.
Shailvi, I think you've given us so much great stuff to think about, both in terms of what are the processes that we can put in place in our companies, but also into our teams, and just really help us self-reflect a little bit more on what our products are doing that could potentially cause harm in ways that we don't know. And I think this has been an amazing conversation. I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Shailvi. This is Nina Ubaldo. I don't remember. This is such a unique kind of look at this. I really, Shailvi, you are why we do what we do. So thank you for, thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah, thanks again. I appreciate you all prioritizing my voice, and I appreciate all the awesome work that you all do.
And thank you to all our listeners, and take care, and we'll catch you all next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Choose Inclusion podcast. Make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can see closed captioning for this podcast on our YouTube channel. You can find us online on our website, chooseinclusion.com, and contact us on Twitter @chooseinclusion.